iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with us for another installment of the iHeartPodcast webinar speaker series. This is probably my favorite part of the week because we get to stop down and talk to a partner, a creator, a content maker that we have a relationship with and try to support. And I think what's cool about podcasting is creators come from a lot of different kinds of mediums. None of us honestly started out as podcasters quite yet. And so these have lent themselves to really cool conversations that, yes, have been about podcasting, but about a lot of stuff. This week is no exception. It'll be an awesome conversation with Will Fulton. First of all, Will, thank you so much for showing up and hanging out with us. I really do appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
So Will does a show that's a co-production between Thrillist and iHeartMedia called Explorers. And the show focuses on different aspects of travel. I think it's cool because it's constantly a kind of unique take on travel. We'll get into all of that. The new season of the show is out this October. Will, let's jump in first in a question that is not planned, but I'm fascinated by it anyway. We're talking about a travel podcast at its core. And I know that it does travel, like I said, in its own different way and covers areas and topics inside travel that I think are really cool and unique. But travel seems to be a weird topic to be talking about today and in the last year and a half and maybe 2 years now. How do you, as someone who, at least as part of what you create and put out there in the world, as you tell stories about travel and you try to change people's perspectives on travel, how did you look at the world in March of 2020, in maybe December of 2020, maybe now? Like, how did you process quarantine as the kind of creator that you are? Because I imagine you were like, whoa, what do I do with this? How did you work through that?
No, that's a great question. And I think the interesting thing is we decided to make a travel podcast during the pandemic. It wasn't something that we had before that, all of a sudden COVID hits and we had to scramble and adjust. We made the purposeful decision to release this during quarantine. And I think, Thrillist has been a brand for over a decade, and we've been focused on telling people where to go and, more importantly, what to do when they get there. And the quarantine wasn't going to stop that. People still turned to us. It became less of, how to plan this awesome trip to the south of France and more like how to be a voyeur and imagine going somewhere else, because I think we all needed that, right? I think we all needed that escape, even if it was a mental escape. So I think for the first few months, it was that, right? It's hey, we want to hear your best travel stories. We want to be able to have our audience live vicariously through things that we did before. And I honestly think that it got a lot of people through those tough months, where everything was unsure. We saw it on our website that people were just really interested in reading about these, locations that we couldn't visit and watching videos about that. And we tried to tap into that wanderlust that wasn't being satisfied in real life, but people were so hungry to just sit on their computers and their phones and just get a little break from life. So that's how we started out. And I think as, the ebb and flow of safe travel went on and off. During the summer, we focused on domestic cities, ways you can visit cities in your own neck of the woods, so to speak, safely. And I think more than ever, people were looking at us as a resource because traveling is more complicated than ever in many ways, and people want to do it more than ever in many ways. So it certainly was an adjustment. I mean, personally, it was really tough. My partner is the executive travel editor of the website. We love to travel. It's just what we do. Weekend trips. We try to get away as much as we love New York. We try to get away as much as possible. And, we tried to think about what we would want to do, and we saw a lot of people going on road trips. We saw a lot of people taking weekend trips instead of long vacations. So it was just really about thinking about what I want to do as a human being, as someone who loves travel, because I think that one of the cool things about this show and our website is I use Thrillist and people like to use Thrillist. I feel like we can tap into that really well. So I just want to let the easy question, the easy answer there is we just went with our guts and we just put out the kind of show that we wanted to listen to. And I think that's really important. And I think it steered us correctly,
But when you create this kind of content, when you focus on the travel vertical, at least as a big part of what you do with iHeartMedia and beyond, does it worry you on a fundamental level when the world moves into a thing like quarantine? Because you're like, we're not going to be with each other as much. We're not going to break out of our boxes as much. We're not going to see other places as much. And I imagine as a creator who writes a lot of content like this, who puts out a lot of content around travel, I don't want to lead the witness, but maybe it's triggering alarm bells for you that others wouldn't think of. That sense of exploration, of discovery, of learning new things just by being in places that you aren't from, all that gets shut down in quarantine. It's one of these, I think, really scary ripple effects of it. Does any of that go through your head too, of like, man, travel is fundamentally important to us as people, and that's going to go away for a little while? Are you thinking about that stuff too?
Yeah, well, we were at different stages during this whole thing. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. We all lived through it, right? And I think especially last summer, to hit on a point that you just mentioned, my favorite part of traveling is meeting new people and striking up conversation with strangers. I think that is the most beautiful and fundamentally great part of travel. I think what we saw, to your point, is last year, a lot of people were doing road trips with their family or their pod. So they were finding ways to explore new places, but not necessarily put themselves or anyone else at risk. I think that's one of the reasons why national parks, became more populated than they ever have before with tourists, which, kind of messes up the idea of being alone when you're at a national park that's more crowded than it ever has been. But that type of experience about, having your core group, getting in a car, I think more families took road trips last year than they have, maybe since my parents were kids. And I think that's a big part of it. It's like exploring the world, doing it safely, and maybe not having all of the benefits and all of the experiences that you would during quote unquote normal times, but finding a way to adapt, going to places like the Grand Canyon, going to places like Yellowstone, going to Death Valley, where you can kind of be alone and be with your core group and be safe, but still experience the kind of travel that you want.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's what goes through my head too, is I think it made travel more intentional for me.
Yeah.
And maybe in its own way more meaningful, but I don't want to hog this. I'm joined today by Nikki Ettore, who leads our New York production team. Nikki, you have produced a ridiculous amount of the hits coming out of the iHeartMedia podcast network. What's your take on all this travel stuff? What would you ask Will?
I guess I would ask you, Will. I mean, from an editorial perspective, like in terms of like crafting the show and the episodes, like what do you feel is the most important thing to consider when you're like when you're ideating a segment? Like, is there a certain sort of criteria that you kind of like, like normally when we're producing a show and trying to figure out, okay, like what this show is, like we'll map out, okay, like does it hit like these three pieces of criteria? Like, is it going to make sense? So like, what do you use in that respect?
Yeah. So, my background is I was a staff writer at Thrillist for years. And I did food and travel and kind of the intersection there. I did a lot of domestic work, writing city guides and things like that. And when we do a city guide, which is about half of our episodes concentrate on, bigger questions about travel or specific stories. Then half of them focus in on one city or region. And I think when we do focus on a city or a region or a place, it's incredibly important. Doing a guide to LA in 35 minutes is impossible. We could spend a week's worth of audio and not even scratch the surface. So for us, it's mostly about the people that are in those cities and what their experience in those cities is like and what makes that city fundamentally different from any other place in the world. And one of the ways we do that is we always try to make the show as diverse and inclusive as possible. And we try to connect to people with human stories and personal stories because, we could rattle off a list of the best places in Thai Town to visit in LA. But what we did is we had one of our excellent staff writers, Kat Thompson, go on a tour of Thai Town with her mom. She's of Thai descent, and visit the places they went to when she was a kid and they had just come from Thailand. And that, to me, you get those recommendations, but it's from a personal standpoint, and it shows a side where, I think that travel media and food media is still catching up with this idea of inclusivity and this idea that travel is for everyone. And Thrillist is no exception. I think that we're learning every day. I think that we've made great strides, personally in telling diverse stories and inclusive stories. And that's really what we look at it when we come in from the top. It's, what can we do that's different, and what can we do that actually is surprising and is actually something that, is not only rattling off a list of recommendations, but telling a story too, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guess take us into the writer's room or in that development room, and how does sort of the secret sauce, how does that happen?
Yeah, I would love to say that, we just pick a city and I'm so smart that I just know all this stuff about it, but that's not how it works. We have a really wide net of freelancers and employees and, staffers and friends that really boots on the ground in all of these cities. So, let's say we are covering Washington, D.C., which we did last year. And we kind of talk about, what are your preconceived notions of D.C.? And when we did that episode, it was funny because most of us are New York based around the East Coast. And so many of us had never even been to Washington, D.C. We have people that have been all over the world and no one had been to our nation's capital. Curiosity drives us. And putting it out there, this is truly a show that I feel like it's a lot of me. I might be the primary voice there, but so many people at our company have touched this show and been on it and been behind the scenes. It's truly a work of so many hands. And I love that about that. So that's how we approach. And we just talk to people. We'll call friends. I'll make phone call appointments with people that I don't really know and just say, you grew up in Austin your whole life. What should we talk about?
Do you have a favorite episode that you've done?
So I have a couple that I love all of them. There's some that I think are really fun. We did, I think, our second episode of last season. It wasn't city-based, or actually our third, I should say. It was about famous houses that you recognize from, films or TV shows, and the kind of cult of personality that gravitates around them. And most interesting to me, the positives and negatives of living in those houses. We did a big kind of investigative segment about this woman who bought the house from the Goonies. I don't know if you are familiar with the film, The Goonies.
I am.
No? Oh, okay. You were shaking your head. I was like, you have to be.
No, I'm shaking my head because I already feel bad for this lady.
Oh my God. So the town is Astoria, Oregon, and it's a beautiful town in its own right. Great beach town. We write about it as, this is one of a hidden gem on the Oregon coast. This woman bought the house because it's on the beach. If you remember the movie, it's a beautiful house.
Totally. I have a visual of this house, and I'm feeling increasingly bad for this lady.
Yeah, you should, because she bought it because she loved the house, and they started having these big reunion anniversary celebrations in Astoria for the Goonies. And every year, I'm telling you, tens of thousands of people would show up for this. And the stories that I got in touch, the woman herself wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't talk to the press, but I talked to some of her neighbors, and the stories are just people knocking on the door at 5 a.m., people urinating in her flower bed, people an RV drove off the cliff by her driveway. So it's just it also connects with something that we try to do every episode, and it's it's front loaded with something that's interesting. It's front loaded with, I want to hear about this town and I want to hear about this house that I know, but also, what is the greater point? What are we trying to say here? And in that episode, we were kind of trying to say, these tourist attractions are great. Everyone wants to go and see the Goonies house, but think about what you're doing. Be a conscientious traveler. And that's so important to us because in each of our episodes, we want to give picks on things to do. We want to tell cool stories, but we also want to draw out a bigger point about travel and what that means.
Where are you from originally?
I was born in Pittsburgh, which is a great city. We're planning on covering it this season. It's a great weekend trip. But I grew up in New Jersey, in Springsteen country, Jersey Shore.
And Nikki, where did you grow up?
I also grew up in New Jersey, South
Okay,
Jersey.
really?
Yeah, what town?
I grew up in Red Bank.
Okay, I was south, so I grew up in Medford, which is very close to Philly.
Yeah, I'm more
as a non-New Jerseyan. Help me out, Will. What did do an Explorer Redux episode on New Jersey?
Oh man,
Put you on the spot.
New Jersey is a small state, but I have to say, there's so much in what I used to tell people is, I grew up 10 minutes this way was the beach, 10 minutes that way was a horse farm and like literal farms. New Jersey is called the Garden State for a reason. I think a lot of people drive down the Parkway and they see the back of Giant Stadium and a lot of oil refinery plants, but New Jersey is so beautiful. It's so welcoming. This is a cliche, but just every stereotype you've heard about it is probably wrong. The people are friendly. It's a beautiful place. It's a great place to grow up. I mean, I went to the beach every day in the summer when I was a kid. So I would say to do an episode about New Jersey, you couldn't. You'd have to narrow it down. Like Nikki mentioned South Jersey. I'm from what you would call Central Jersey. There's North Jersey. There's the Shore. Each of those probably warrants its own at least half an hour show because there's so much to do there.
I'll steal the next one, Nikki, and then over to you. But when you talked about New Jersey and your favorite episodes and stuff like that, is there a spot in the world that you feel like is the best kept secret of the world? Like when we all open back up, we can all travel very freely and no worries again. Is there a place you're like, just trust me, go to this place that you've never heard of? Does that ring a bell?
It's a constant debate with me, with everyone on our websites. We want to tell people the best places to go, but also we don't want to ruin our favorite places. But no, I would say, we talked about, everyone is always looking for this hidden place, this place where like nobody knows about and you want to go there. For me, I more like telling people places that are just overlooked. I mentioned Washington, D.C., and I don't mean to bring up the same place again, but like I said, it shocked me how few people that I know that live hours away haven't been there. And it's such a great bar town. It's such a great restaurant town. And obviously there's a lot of culture and museums. I would say on an international level, it's definitely not a well-kept secret, but Mexico City is a place that is so close to us. I think a lot of people have the wrong idea about what to expect there. And I've never heard of anyone go to Mexico City, come back and be like, it was just okay. Everyone comes back, raves about it, books another flight. I mean, in terms of booking an affordable Airbnb right in a neighborhood you want to be in terms of a ton of bars and absolutely world-class restaurants that are, basically a lot cheaper than in New York, and you're getting a lot more. So that's a place that I always would recommend to someone if they've never been, because I think it blows most people away.
Who you are and what the podcast is like, it's talking to people and sharing and having them like share their stories about these like wonderful places and people being able to like see these places through their lens. And so like you're having a ton of conversations with like a bunch of, amazing people. I guess, is there like certain conversations or people that just like really, really stood out in this process and kind of like changed the way you thought about a place?
Yeah, I would say that my favorite interview of last season, we did an Austin episode, and I talked with Dan Rather, who needs no further explanation. Yeah. He's one of my personal heroes, and talking to him, especially at that time. So this would have been October last year, like really still in the throes of the pandemic, right before election season, and having his perspective not only about how Austin has changed and what it's gone through and what it's like now, as opposed to when, he was a younger man and raising a family there. What he talked about in terms of America and how Americans travel, and, how it kind of goes back to the connection point that I was making before, just about this idea of all of us having common ground and about travel supporting that. And when you go around the country and even around the world, you do realize that people are more alike than they are different. And it does take that face-to-face meeting so many times to make that point shine through. So, talking to him just about that really profound stuff, and then also if he prefers Lone Star over Shinerbach, like just,
so cool,
it was just amazing. And he is such a legend, and just being able to talk to him, period, was just so special. And, he's just, I'll remember that forever, honestly.
Yeah. Travel is such like the ultimate unifier, right?
Yeah.
Wait, I have another quick question. I was listening to that episode with Sammy Hagar and Guy Fieri, and after it, you guys are like, "We're all friends. We're all friends." Like, are you guys still friends? Is that in fact true?
So I have to say, like, doing this job and being a writer, you do get to meet and interact with people like that, people that you know because they're famous. Those two, I would say particularly Guy, were some of the nicest, most welcoming, friendly people I've ever encountered on this job. And he offered to send me shoes, Guy Fieri did, after a conversation.
That's
and
awesome.
I gave him my address and he followed through. So I don't know if we're friends, but
you have a new pair of shoes.
I have a new pair of shoes.
The guy sent you shoes. I mean, that doesn't indicate friendship. I don't know what your official Thrillist bio says that you're a writer, yes, but also, and I'm quoting, kind of air quoting, passionate doer of other stuff. Just real quick, what's some of that other stuff? And can you do more travel, because we like that a lot? But what's some of that other stuff?
I never thought that someone would read that out loud to me. Now I think I might change it. You got me, Conal. I mean, I have a lot of interests. I play guitar. I love to read and write. I really do. That's kind of what got me into all of this. And I would say, going back to our national parks discussion, one of the people that has gotten really into visiting national parks and doing hikes and that more outdoorsy stuff for the past couple of years is me. I just got back from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I spent a few days in Grand Teton, and that aspect of travel has really come out in me for the past few years, in the past few years, I should say. So yeah, I like to play sports. I like to walk around New York. I love New York. I love to experience the bars and the restaurants here, but I'm going to update that.
Yeah, you're like, that's coming out now.
It's better than, yeah. So, but one of the things you do obviously now is podcasting, right? Like, why this medium? Why have you chosen this medium? And I can close on this question, but we love the medium. It's what Nikki and I do every day, all day. We make a bunch of podcasts. We love it. I guess I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Is there something special about this medium when you make it, when you get feedback from listeners, that it feels a little bit like, wow, podcasting is kind of special?
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, I listened to the radio a lot. I listened to audiobooks a lot. So I do kind of have this affinity for the theater of the mind, so to speak. And one thing just from a creative perspective that I love about podcasting is, I think, like I said, I come from a background as a writer, as a staff writer. And right now, my official role within the company is I am a senior development producer on the video team. So I work on the video side, and I've helped us kind of adapt our brand to what we want Thrills Video to do. And for me, something really interesting that I picked up early in the process is this medium is kind of like a perfect marriage for me between the written word and some of the things I love about making videos, like being able to add music, being able to add effects, and just like hear the voices of the people we're interviewing, but, structuring a story and writing funny, maybe sometimes profound lines and scattering that with, those within. It's a great combination of the two mediums, and it kind of brings out what I love most in both of them. So I really love telling stories through audio. I feel like even during the pandemic, I would take super long walks, listen to my favorite podcasts, and that really kept me sane. So it was an interesting switch, but we all love it. This is really the first podcast we've worked on as a team at Thrillist, and we just had so much fun. This is such a cliche and it sounds stupid, but this part of my job does not feel like work. We have so much fun doing this, and we have so much fun talking to people and exploring these places, either through my kitchen or actually going there. So, I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
It's an awesome answer. And I really, we are super excited. We're very grateful for the partnership with Thrillist. We're really grateful to be able to work with you, Will. I'm very excited for the new season of Explorers. Everybody should be. You should binge seasons 1 through 3 and check out the new one when it comes in the fall in October, I think. But
yes,
I think this content's really cool, period. But like right now, in the world we're in, I actually think travel content is more important than ever, because you might not be able to go there in person this week or this month or this season, and I'm hopefully wrong, but I think it makes it more important than ever. So I really do appreciate you hanging out with me and Nikki and letting us ask you a few questions like this. Well, thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you, Conal. Thank you, Nikki. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Everybody, thanks for hanging out with us. It's been an awesome 30 minutes. We will see you next week for another session of the iHeartPodcast webinar speaker series. Stay well.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.